There is a particular kind of silence that exists only in the moments before your heart breaks. It's not an empty silence, but a heavy one, thick with the echoes of all the words you wish you could say and the crushing weight of the ones you've just heard. I was standing in the softly lit vestibule of the chapel, the scent of white lilies and hope filling the air, my hands trembling as I adjusted the single string of pearls around my neck. The same pearls my mother wore on her wedding day and her mother before her. I had imagined this moment for my daughter Chloe since the day she was born, a tiny squalling thing with a fierce grip on my finger. I pictured myself smoothing her veil, clasping the necklace for her, sitting in the front row, dabbing my eyes with a lace handkerchief as I watched her walk toward her future. But life, I've learned, has a way of quietly dismantling our most cherished pictures. Just 10 minutes ago, my son-in-law-to-be, Mark, had found me, his handsome face a mask of uncomfortable sympathy. "Eleanor," he'd said, his voice low and rushed. "Chloe and her mom, they think it's best if, well, for the sake of the photos and the seating chart, they've arranged a lovely spot for you further back, with the other guests." He couldn't even meet my eyes. Other guests. The words landed like stones in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't to sit with the family. I wasn't to be in the mother of the bride photos. After 23 years of raising her, of being her only parent, of being both her mother and her father since my David passed, I was being politely, surgically removed from the narrative of her wedding day. I was to be an other guest. The reason, though unspoken, hung between us as clearly as the chapel bells. Susan, Mark's mother, was a woman of formidable presence and even more formidable wealth. She had swept into Chloe's life during her engagement, a whirlwind of designer boutiques and lavish planning, and I had watched, from a growing distance, as my daughter was seduced by a version of motherhood that was all glamour and no grit. Susan had never warmed a bottle at 3 a.m., never held back hair during a bout of stomach flu, never sat in a silent, dark hospital room praying for a fever to break. She had, however, paid for this wedding, and it seemed the final installment was my demotion. So I stood there, in my simple tea-length dress, feeling the weight of my pearls and the unbearable lightness of my presence, a ghost at my own daughter's feast. The music swelled, the processional beginning, and I knew I had to find my place, my assigned place. I slipped into the chapel, my eyes fixed on the floor, and made my way to the designated row, not in the front, not even in the second, but in the fifth, a row filled with Mark's distant cousins and colleagues. I felt every eye on me. Or perhaps I just imagined it, a hot flush of shame creeping up my neck. I was the spectacle, the woman who didn't belong with her own family. I sank into the hard wooden pew, my heart pounding a frantic, sorrowful rhythm. The music was beautiful, but to me it sounded like a funeral dirge. I clenched my hands in my lap, my knuckles white, trying to breathe, trying not to let the tears I'd promised myself I wouldn't cry spill over and ruin the only thing I had left, my dignity. And that's when I felt a gentle pressure on my shoulder and a soft, low voice, weathered by time and kindness, whispered close to my ear. "Come sit with me." The voice was like an anchor in a stormy sea, so unexpected and yet so grounding that for a moment I couldn't move. I turned my head slowly, my vision blurred by unshed tears, and saw an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, his hand still resting lightly on my shoulder. He was dressed in a simple, well-worn suit, and in that single glance, I saw a depth of understanding that nearly undid me. He didn't say anything else, just gave a slight, reassuring nod towards the empty space beside him in the pew. It wasn't my assigned seat, But in that moment, it felt like the only place in the world I was meant to be. Without a second thought, I gathered my small clutch purse and moved a few feet to sit next to him. The simple act feeling like a monumental act of rebellion and self-preservation. As I settled in, the opening chords of Here Comes the Bride began, and the entire congregation rose. My breath caught in my throat as the doors at the back of the chapel swung open, and there she was, my Chloe. She was a vision, her grandfather's lace veil framing her face, her eyes shining with a joy that made my heart ache. She was looking towards the front, towards Mark, and towards Susan, who was already dabbing her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief perfectly positioned in the front row. She didn't glance my way. The pain was a physical thing, a sharp twist deep inside. But then the man beside me, without looking at me, quietly offered me a clean, plain white handkerchief. It was such a simple, old-fashioned gesture, so starkly different from Susan's performative one, that a single tear finally escaped and traced a warm path down my cheek. I took it with a trembling hand, murmuring a thank you I wasn't sure he could hear over the music. As Chloe began her slow walk down the aisle on the arm of a distant uncle, a role I had naively assumed would be filled by my brother, but had been reassigned by Susan for aesthetic reasons, the man beside me leaned in slightly. "They never look where we hope they will during the walk," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They're looking at their future. It doesn't mean they've forgotten their past." His words were a balm, a small flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness of my hurt. He understood. He saw the entire silent tragedy playing out in the fifth row. We sat through the ceremony, and I found my gaze drifting from my beautiful daughter to the strong, silent man beside me. Who was he? A friend of the groom's family? A kind-hearted stranger who simply took pity on a lonely woman? The ceremony was a blur of vows and rings and promises, and all the while I was acutely aware of the quiet, solid presence beside me, a shield against the feeling of being utterly alone in a room full of people. When the pronouncement was made and Chloe and Mark turned to face the crowd as husband and wife, their faces radiant, the chapel erupted in applause. I clapped too, my hands still shaking, my smile feeling fragile and thin. As the new recessional music began and the bridal party started their joyful exit, I prepared to be left behind once more, to navigate the reception alone. But as the crowd began to stir, the man turned to me fully. "My name is Arthur," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners, "and I would be honored if you would allow me to be your escort for the rest of this, well, for the reception." He said the last word with a hint of a smile, as if acknowledging the complicated battlefield a wedding reception could be. I looked at Arthur, this stranger who had seen my shattered pieces and hadn't looked away, and I felt a knot of tension in my chest begin to loosen just a little. "I'm Eleanor," I managed to say, my voice still thick with emotion. "And I would like that very much." It was more than mere politeness. It was a lifeline. As the guests began to file out of the pews, chattering excitedly, Arthur offered me his arm. It was a gesture from another time, so formal and yet so deeply comforting. I slipped my hand into the crook of his elbow, feeling the sturdy wool of his jacket and the firm strength beneath it. We moved with the crowd, but we were in our own little bubble of quiet understanding. We ended up walking slowly, letting the throng of people surge ahead towards the reception hall. "I must confess, Eleanor," Arthur said, his voice low and thoughtful, "I've been watching families at these events for longer than I'd care to admit. There's a particular look a person gets when they're being edited out of a picture they helped paint. I saw that look on you the moment you walked in." His words didn't feel like an intrusion. They felt like an acknowledgement. "It's a long story," I sighed, the weight of it all pressing down on me again. They usually are, he replied gently, and they usually involve money and pride, not necessarily in that order. He had seen right to the heart of it. We reached the entrance of the grand reception hall, a space transformed by Susan's checkbook into a winter wonderland despite it being June. It was breathtaking, all shimmering white linens, crystal centerpieces, and soft blue uplighting. A massive ice sculpture of two intertwined swans graced the center of the room. It was perfect and cold, and it felt absolutely nothing like my daughter. I hesitated at the threshold, my grip on Arthur's arm tightening unconsciously. The room was a sea of unfamiliar, elegantly dressed people. I could see the head table at the far end, where Chloe was now sitting, laughing at something Mark was saying. Susan was beside her, one possessive hand on Chloe's shoulder. There was no empty seat for me. Arthur followed my gaze and gave my hand a slight, reassuring pat where it rested on his arm. "The best view," he murmured, "is often from the edges. You can see the whole story from there. Come, I see our table." He guided me not towards the front, but to a table tucked near the back, close to the dance floor, but away from the glaring center of attention. It was, I realized, the perfect place to observe without being scrutinized. As we sat down, he gestured subtly towards the head table. "Look at her," he said. "Really look. Past the dress and the makeup. Does she look happy? Or does she look like she's performing?" I looked. I really looked. And for the first time that day, I saw past my own hurt. I saw the way Chloe's smile would flicker when she thought no one was looking. I saw the slight stiffness in her posture as Susan whispered something in her ear. I saw my daughter. Not a perfect porcelain doll, but a young woman trying to navigate the treacherous waters of two competing worlds, trying to please a new mother without utterly betraying the old one. It didn't erase the pain of my exile, but it planted a small, fragile seed of empathy amidst the hurt. Just then, a young server came by with a tray of champagne flutes. Arthur took two, handing one to me. He raised his glass slightly. "To the quiet corners," he said, his eyes holding mine, "and the unexpected companions we find in them." I clinked my glass against his, the soft chime a promise of a very different evening than the one I had dreaded. That first sip of champagne felt like the first real breath I'd taken all day. The bubbles seemed to lift a little of the weight from my soul. Arthur had a way of pulling my attention away from the drama at the head table and towards the smaller, more human moments happening all around us. He pointed out a little flower girl who was meticulously stealing the raspberries from every dessert plate within her reach, and the pair of elderly aunts who were clearly critiquing every single person who walked onto the dance floor. He was a wonderful storyteller, and he made our little corner of the world feel like the most interesting place in the room. When the music started for the father-daughter dance, my heart clenched all over again. I watched as Mark led his mother, Susan, to the floor for their dance, and then Chloe stood, looking for a moment lost. But then, to my utter astonishment, she didn't go to Susan. She walked directly towards our table. My breath hitched. Was she coming to me? But no, her eyes were fixed on Arthur. She stopped before him, a tender, slightly sad smile on her face. "Grandpa Arthur," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "would you do me the honor?" Grandpa Arthur. The pieces clicked into place with a soft, heartbreaking finality. This was Arthur Millerson, Mark's paternal grandfather, the man whose son, Mark's father, had passed away 5 years ago. The man Susan had reportedly found dowdy and an embarrassment to her social standing. He was as much in exile as I was. Arthur stood, his movement slow and dignified. He took Chloe's hand. "The honor would be all mine, my dear," he said, his voice warm. As they walked to the dance floor, Chloe finally looked at me. Her eyes, so much like her father's, welled with tears. She didn't say anything, but in that one look, I saw a universe of apology, of love, of a daughter trapped in a gilded cage not of her making. She had chosen him. In this small, silent act of rebellion, she had chosen the grandparent who represented genuine love over the one who represented social currency. As they began to dance to a soft, classic love song, Arthur whispered something to Chloe, and she laughed. A real, genuine laugh that reminded me of the little girl who used to dance in our kitchen in her socks. I watched them, my own tears flowing freely now, but they were no longer tears of pure sorrow. They were tears of a complicated, painful, yet profound understanding. Arthur was showing me something crucial. He wasn't fighting for a spot in the front row. He had accepted his place on the sidelines, and it turned it into a position of quiet strength and observation. He was enjoying his grandson's wedding on his own terms, with grace and dignity. He was dancing with the bride, not as a political statement, but simply because he loved her, and she had asked him. When the dance ended, Chloe hugged him tightly, and then, to my shock, she walked straight from his arms to me. She knelt beside my chair, her beautiful white dress pooling on the floor, not caring who saw. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I'm so sorry. About the seat, about the photos, about everything. It all just got so out of control. I didn't know how to stop it." I cupped her face in my hands, my precious girl. "I know, baby," I whispered back, my thumbs wiping her tears. "I know." In that hushed moment, with my hands cradling my daughter's tear-streaked face, the glittering ice swans and the perfect centerpieces melted away. It was just us, mother and daughter, surrounded by the hum of a party that suddenly felt a million miles away. "She said it would be less confusing for the photographer," Chloe whispered, her words tumbling out in a guilty rush. "She said having two mothers in the pictures would look messy. And she paid for everything, Mom. I felt like I couldn't say no to anything." I saw it then. The immense pressure she had been under, a pressure I had been too hurt to see. She wasn't rejecting me. She was a young woman trying to keep a very expensive, very delicate peace. "Shh," I soothed, pulling her into a gentle hug, careful not to crush her dress. "We don't have to talk about it now. This is your day. You are a breathtaking bride." She clung to me for a moment longer, a little girl in a woman's body, before taking a shaky breath and standing. "Will you save me a dance later?" she asked, her eyes pleading. "The mother of the bride dance?" My heart, which had felt like a shard of glass in my chest all day, suddenly felt whole and warm again. "I will be right here waiting," I promised. She squeezed my hand and then was swept back into the whirlwind, pulled away by a cousin wanting a photo. I watched her go, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible an hour ago. Arthur returned to the table, a quiet smile on his face as he sat down. "A bridge," he said simply, nodding towards where Chloe had been. "It only takes one person willing to take that first step to cross it." The rest of the reception unfolded in a different light. The speeches came, and Susan gave a polished, flawless toast about legacy and new beginnings that sounded like it had been written by a publicist. Then Mark stood up. He spoke haltingly at first, about love and family, and then he looked directly at our table. "And I'd especially like to thank my grandpa Arthur," he said, his voice growing stronger. "You taught my dad, and you taught me, that a man's character isn't measured by his wallet, but by his word. And to Eleanor," he added, his gaze finding mine, "for raising the most incredible woman I've ever known. Thank you for sharing your daughter with me." It was a public correction, subtle but unmistakable. Susan's smile was tight, but the rest of the room applauded warmly. Arthur leaned towards me. "See," he said softly, "the truth has a way of rising to the top like cream." When the DJ announced the mother-son dance, Mark, to his credit, danced with Susan. But when the mother of the bride dance was called, Chloe immediately left the head table and walked purposefully through the crowd, her eyes locked on mine. Every head turned. The music was a sweet instrumental version of "You Are My Sunshine," the song I had sung to her every night when she was small. As we stepped onto the dance floor, just the two of us, the world narrowed to the feel of her hand in mine and the sound of our song. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered again as we swayed. "I love you," I whispered back, because in that moment, it was the only thing that mattered. I will always love you. We danced, and for those 3 minutes, I was exactly where I was always meant to be. As the final notes of our song faded, the DJ seamlessly transitioned into an upbeat pop number, and the dance floor began to fill with laughing, moving bodies. Chloe gave my hand one last firm squeeze before being swept up by a group of her friends. I stood for a moment at the edge of the swirling colors and music, feeling both wonderfully included and peacefully separate. I made my way back to our table, where Arthur was sitting contentedly, watching the celebration with the air of a man who had long ago made peace with his role as an observer. "That," he said as I sat down, "was a far more beautiful picture than any photographer could have staged." He was right. That single dance, born from a daughter's remorse and a mother's forgiveness, had rewritten the entire narrative of the day. I looked at Arthur, truly seeing him now. The gentle patience in his eyes, the quiet dignity in his posture. He had not only given me sanctuary in my darkest moment at the wedding, but he had also shown me, without a word of lecture, how to navigate this painful situation with grace. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked softly. "You knew who I was when you invited me to sit with you." He gave a slow, thoughtful nod, his gaze still on the dancers. "I did. Mark had shown me many pictures. He speaks of you with such high regard, you know. He told Chloe she was the luckiest woman in the world to have a mother like you." His words washed over me, healing another layer of hurt I hadn't even fully acknowledged. "I saw you walk in, and I saw the moment they told you. The light just went out of you. I've been to enough of these society functions with my daughter-in-law to recognize the look of someone being strategically removed. I couldn't let you sit there in that darkness alone." My throat tightened with a fresh wave of emotion, but this time it was pure gratitude. "You have no idea what you did for me, Arthur. You gave me back my dignity when I felt I had none left." He finally turned to look at me, his eyes warm. "Nonsense, my dear. Your dignity was always there. I just offered you a quiet place to remember it." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the party. I saw Chloe glance over at us several times, and each time she had a small, genuine smile on her face. She was happy to see us together. The bouquet toss came and went. The cake was cut with much fanfare, and eventually the evening began to wind down. As guests started to leave, Chloe and Mark began their rounds of farewells. When they reached our table, Chloe leaned down and hugged me, a long, heartfelt embrace. "I love you, Mom," she said, her voice firm and clear. "I'll call you tomorrow, and we'll have a long talk, a real one." Then she turned and hugged Arthur. "Thank you, Grandpa," she whispered. Mark shook Arthur's hand and then turned to me. "Eleanor, thank you for everything. Truly." As they moved on, Arthur and I gathered our things. The grand hall was nearly empty, the staff already beginning the arduous task of cleaning up. We walked out together into the cool night air. The stars were brilliant overhead. "Can I offer you a ride home?" Arthur asked, his breath making a small cloud in the night air. I looked at this kind, unexpected guardian angel of an evening and smiled. "I would like that very much," I said. And as we walked towards the parking lot, I realized the day hadn't ended with an exile, but with a new and deeply treasured beginning. Arthur's car was as unassuming as his suit, a clean but older sedan that smelled faintly of leather and peppermint. He held the door open for me with the same old-world courtesy he'd shown all evening, and I slid into the passenger seat, the events of the day settling over me like a heavy, intricate tapestry. We drove in a comfortable silence for the first few minutes, the quiet hum of the engine a soothing balm. The glittering chaos of the reception was behind us, and the familiar streets of my neighborhood felt like a return to reality. "You know," Arthur began, his eyes on the road, "my late wife, Helen, had a saying. She'd say, 'Arthur, families aren't photographs. You can't just crop out the parts you don't like and expect the picture to still be whole.'" I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She was a wise woman. "That she was," he said, a fond smile in his voice. "She never cared much for Susan's grand productions. She always said the most important moments in life happen in the quiet corners, not under the spotlight." He was speaking my own heart back to me. I'd spent so many years building a life with Chloe in those quiet corners. Homework at the kitchen table, whispered secrets before bed, quiet tears wiped away. Susan had provided the spotlight, and for a while I feared its glare had blinded Chloe to the value of our quieter world. "It's hard," I confessed, staring out at the passing streetlights. "It's hard not to feel replaced, as if everything I've done, all the years of love and worry, could be so easily overwritten by fancy parties and a big check." Arthur nodded slowly. "I felt the same when my son married Susan. He changed. The boy who loved fixing old radios with me in the garage suddenly only cared about stock portfolios and country club memberships. I felt I'd lost him long before the cancer took him." His voice was steady, but the pain in it was a living thing, old and deep. "But you see, Eleanor, we can't fight their world on its terms. We can't compete with money and glamour. Our currency is different. It's patience, it's memory. It's showing up quietly and consistently with love. It's the long game." The long game. The phrase resonated deeply. He was right. My hurt had been about today, this single, brutal day. But Arthur was talking about a lifetime. He pulled up in front of my modest house, the porch light I'd left on glowing like a warm welcome. He turned off the engine and looked at me. "Today was a battle in a very long war," he said. "And I'd say we won a significant victory. You got your dance, your daughter looked you in the eye and asked for your forgiveness, and you showed her and everyone in that room what real class and grace look like. You can't buy that." I felt my eyes well up again, but this time the tears were pure and cleansing. He had reframed the entire day for me. It wasn't a story of my humiliation, but a story of my resilience. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "For everything. You didn't just save my evening. You saved me." He patted my hand gently. "We saved each other a little, I think. It gets lonely on the sidelines. It's nice to have company." I got out of the car, and he waited until I was safely inside before driving away. I stood in my quiet living room, the silence now feeling peaceful instead of empty. I took off the string of pearls, my fingers tracing their smooth, cool surface. They had witnessed my heartbreak and my redemption all in one day. I placed them carefully back in their velvet box, not as a relic of a painful past, but as a symbol of a future I was now ready to face, with a little more wisdom and a lot more grace. The following morning, sunlight streamed through my kitchen window. painting a bright, warm rectangle on the worn wooden table where Chloe and I had shared thousands of meals. The silence of the house felt different now, not lonely, but contemplative, like the quiet after a storm has passed. I made a single cup of tea, the events of the wedding replaying in my mind, not with the sharp sting of fresh hurt, but with the softer ache of a lesson being absorbed. Arthur's words echoed in the stillness. The long game. I was just finishing my tea when the phone rang, its jangle cutting through the morning calm. I knew it was Chloe before I even picked it up. "Mom?" Her voice was small, tentative, a world away from the confident bride of yesterday. "I'm here, baby," I said, my voice calm and steady. There was a shaky sigh on the other end of the line. "I don't even know where to start. I feel so awful about everything. The sea, the photos. I let it all happen." I closed my eyes, listening not just to her words, but to the guilt and confusion tangled within them. "Tell me," I said softly. "Just start from the beginning." And she did. The story poured out of her, of Susan's overwhelming generosity that felt more and more like control, of the subtle comments about my simple taste and how it might clash with the wedding's aesthetic, of the slow, insidious pressure that made her feel that accepting Susan's vision was the only way to be accepted into her new family. She said it would be cleaner for the photographer. Chloe repeated, her voice breaking. "And I was so overwhelmed, Mom. I gave in. I thought I could just explain it to you later, that you'd understand. But when I saw your face in the chapel, I knew I'd done something terrible." I listened, my heart aching for her. She wasn't a villain. She was a young woman who had gotten lost. "Chloe," I said when her torrent of words finally slowed, "look around your new apartment. Do you see the quilt on your bed?" There was a pause. "Yes, I made that, every stitch." "Do you see the photo on your bookshelf? The one of you and your dad on the carousel?" "Yes." Her voice was a whisper. "I took that." Your life, Chloe, is built on a foundation of 1,000 quiet, loving moments from this house. No single day, no matter how beautiful or how painful, can ever replace that foundation. It will always be there, holding you up. I could hear her soft crying on the other end of the line. It was a good sound. It was the sound of the wall coming down. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, my darling girl. Always." We talked for almost an hour about the wedding, about Mark, about her hopes and fears. It was the first real conversation we'd had in months. When we finally hung up, the world felt righted. The phone call was the true mother of the bride dance, the one that truly mattered. Later that afternoon, I found myself looking at a photo of David, my late husband. "Our girl is going to be okay," I whispered to his smiling face. "And so am I." I realized then that Arthur hadn't just given me back my dignity, he had handed me a new lens through which to view my entire life, not as a series of losses, but as a long, patient game of love. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was winning. A week passed, each day softening the sharp edges of the wedding memory, transforming it from a raw wound into a scar, a reminder of pain, but also of survival. I was pruning my rose bushes, my hands deep in the earth, finding a familiar solace in the simple, tangible work, when I heard a car door shut. I looked up, shielding my eyes from the sun, and saw Arthur walking up my garden path, a small paper bag in his hand. The sight of him sent a warm, unexpected ripple of pleasure through me. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, stopping at the edge of the flower bed. "I was running an errand and found myself in the neighborhood." I knew it wasn't a coincidence, and the kindness of the gesture made my smile genuine. "Not at all. You're a welcome sight." He held up the bag. "I brought peace offerings, 2 pecan danishes from a bakery I'm rather fond of. I find few problems can't be improved with a good pastry. I laughed, a real easy laugh that felt good. That sounds like a philosophy I can get behind. Let me just wash up. We sat on my porch swing, the one David had hung for me years ago, with the pastries and 2 glasses of iced tea. The silence between us was as comfortable as it had been at the wedding, filled with the chirping of sparrows and the gentle creak of the swing. "How have you been, Eleanor?" he asked, his gaze taking in my peaceful, if slightly untamed garden. "I've been thinking," I said, breaking off a piece of the flaky, sweet Danish. "A lot. Mostly about what you said. The long game. It's changing how I see things." I told him about the phone call with Chloe, about our honest conversation. It felt like we were rebuilding a bridge, I mused, one that I didn't even realize had been so damaged. Arthur nodded, sipping his tea. They have to build their own lives, these children of ours. Sometimes they use materials we wouldn't have chosen, and they make designs we don't understand.
Our job isn't to be the architect. It's to be the solid ground it's built upon. He looked out over the garden. "You have a good piece of land here." It was more than a comment on the property. It was an acknowledgement of the life I had built, the roots I had put down. We talked for over an hour, not just about Chloe and Mark, but about our own lives. He told me more about Helen, about the small bookstore they had run together for 40 years. I told him about David, about his love of bad puns and his dream of sailing the Great Lakes, a dream cancer had stolen. We weren't just 2 lonely people anymore. We were 2 whole people with rich histories and past loves who had found a companionable corner in the present. As he was leaving, he paused at the steps. "I'm not much for society parties," he said, a twinkle in his eye, "but I am rather fond of quiet dinners and good conversation. Perhaps, if you're amenable, we could continue this one next week." My heart gave a little flutter, not of nervousness, but of anticipation. "I would like that very much, Arthur," I said, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I would. The following weeks unfolded like the gentle turning of pages in a beloved book. Arthur and I did have that dinner, and then another. We didn't go to fancy restaurants. We went to quiet, unassuming places where the food was hearty and the noise level allowed for conversation. We explored museums on free admission days, took slow walks in the park, and spent hours on my porch swing, talking about everything and nothing. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a quiet understanding, a meeting of 2 souls who had known deep love and profound loss, and who had decided to choose companionship and kindness in the time they had left. My relationship with Chloe began to find a new, healthier rhythm. Freed from the oppressive weight of Susan's expectations and the guilt over the wedding, she started visiting more often. Sometimes with Mark, sometimes alone. We would have coffee in my kitchen, and she would tell me about the challenges of newlywed life, the silly arguments over loading the dishwasher, the joy of finding a thrift store treasure for their apartment. She was building her own life, just as Arthur had said, and I was learning to be the solid ground, not the foreman. One afternoon, she was helping me repot some herbs on the porch when she said, out of the blue, "I really like Arthur, Mom. He's good for you. You seem lighter." I looked at my daughter, her hands covered in soil, her face open and happy, and I felt a surge of pure, uncomplicated joy. "He is good for me," I agreed. "And so are you." The long game, I was learning, wasn't about waiting passively. It was about actively tending to the gardens of our relationships, pulling the weeds of resentment and planting new seeds of understanding. It was about accepting that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. It wasn't always in the front row of a wedding. Sometimes it was in the 5th row, in a whispered invitation from a kind-eyed stranger. It wasn't always in grand gestures. Sometimes it was in a pecan Danish and a shared porch swing. The story that had begun with one of the most painful moments of my life had,
through the alchemy of grace and an unexpected friendship, become one of my most treasured beginnings. I had learned that family isn't just about blood or seating charts. It's about who shows up for you in your quietest, most vulnerable moments and offers you a place to belong. And as Arthur and I sat on the swing that evening, watching the fireflies blink in the twilight, his hand resting gently over mine, I knew that my story was far from over. It was simply entering its most peaceful and most beautiful chapter yet.